Someone tracks every single dollar they spend, they've got a budget spreadsheet with color-coded categories, they never carry credit card debt, they read the personal finance subreddit religiously, they meal prep on Sundays, they canceled Netflix when they weren't using it enough. They feel good about money, they feel responsible, they're 31 years old and their net worth is $42,000. $42,000 after a decade of working, after years of discipline, after doing everything the responsible adult checklist told them to do. And then there's the guy at the office who buys lunch every single day, has a car payment, goes on 2 vacations a year, and somehow just closed on a rental property. What is happening? Seriously, what is actually going on here? Because those two people played the same game by completely different rules, and the irresponsible one is winning. And the answer to why that happens is not what you think it is. It's not luck. It's not connections. It's not privilege. Well, not entirely. It's something structural. Something that nobody sat you down and explained clearly, because the people who could explain it clearly had no incentive to do so. So that's what this video is. We're going to explain how the good with money trap works and why it's keeping an entire generation of careful, disciplined, genuinely smart people running in place while quietly convinced they're doing everything right. I've thought about this a lot, I've lived a version of it, and I've watched the pattern repeat across enough people to know it's not random. Let me introduce you to the conveyor belt. That's the central metaphor we're working with today, and I'm going to reuse it until it clicks. Picture a conveyor belt moving backward. Not fast, slow, subtle. Just slow enough that you don't feel it under your feet immediately. If you stand still on it, you drift backward. If you walk casually forward, you still drift backward. If you jog, if you're disciplined, if you save, if you budget, if you track every expense, you might stay more or less in place. You stop losing ground as fast. But you're not going anywhere. The people who actually build wealth aren't jogging harder on the same belt. They either stepped off it, found a different belt going the opposite direction, or figured out how to build their own. And the whole time they were doing that, the people jogging in place were looking over their shoulder thinking, those people got lucky. They didn't get lucky, they understood something different about what the belt actually is. Being good with money by the standard definition most people use is jogging on a backward conveyor belt and calling it a fitness journey. Let's talk about what that actually means. The first thing you need to understand is that there is a massive, catastrophic difference between not losing money and building wealth. These are not the same activity, they do not use the same skills, they do not require the same mindset, and critically, they do not produce the same outcomes even if they look almost identical from the outside. Not losing money is defensive, it's risk management, it's compression. You're making yourself a smaller target for financial damage. That is genuinely useful, by the way. I'm not dismissing it. If you have zero savings and you spend every dollar you make and you carry consumer debt, fixing that is absolutely the first step. But here's the thing, and this is where most personal finance advice stops. Fixing the bleeding is not the same as building something. Stopping the damage is not growth. And if you treat damage control as the destination rather than the launch pad, you will spend your entire working life on a belt moving slowly backward, proud of the fact that at least you're not falling. Here's a number that should bother you. The median net worth of an American household in their early 30s is somewhere around $40,000. The median. That means half of all households are below that. And those are people who statistically have been working for a decade already. 10 years of income, 10 years of some degree of saving, and you're sitting on roughly what a decent used car costs. Meanwhile, the average net worth of the top 10% of earners in that same age bracket is somewhere in the range of $700,000 to $1 million. Not because they earn 10 times more. In many cases, their income is 2 or 3 times higher, not 10 times. The gap in net worth is not explained by income alone. It's explained by what happens to money after it's earned. So the question isn't, how do I earn more? Well, it is eventually, but that's not the starting question. The starting question is, why is the same dollar doing such different work depending on whose hands it passes through? And this is where we need to talk about what good with money actually means in practice, because most people have a broken definition. There are, roughly speaking, 3 levels of financial behavior. Not 3 income levels, 3 behavior levels. You can be at any income and be at any of these 3 levels. That distinction matters enormously. Level 1 is basic damage control. This is where you're not spending more than you earn. You have some savings. You don't have revolving credit card debt. You might have a budget. You feel like an adult. This is the level that most personal finance content is written for, and it's the level where most people permanently park themselves, assuming they've arrived somewhere meaningful. Level 2 is capital allocation. This is where you're not just saving money, you're directing it toward things that do work while you sleep. Index funds, real estate, a business, some form of productive asset. The difference between level 1 and level 2 is not the amount of money saved. It's the destination. A person saving 15% of their income into a savings account and a person saving 15% into a diversified index portfolio will look identical on their monthly budget. They will not look identical in 20 years. Level 3 is structural leverage. This is where you're using systems, other people's money, or compounding returns at a scale where your personal income becomes almost a footnote. This is where wealth actually gets built quickly. Most people don't reach this level, and honestly, not everyone needs to. But the reason most people don't reach it is not because they lack discipline. It's because they never left level 1. The conveyor belt moves fastest against people at level 1. Because at level 1, you're playing defense against inflation, against expenses creeping up as you age, against lifestyle expectations increasing as your peer group matures. You're jogging in place. Now here's where it gets interesting, and slightly infuriating. Because there's a psychological mechanism that actively keeps people at level 1, and it's built right into the feeling of being responsible. Think about what happens when you save money. You feel good, you feel virtuous, you feel in control. That feeling is real, and it is powerful, and it is, and I say this gently, slightly dangerous. Because that feeling of control, that sense of doing the right thing, acts as a reward. And when behavior gets rewarded, it gets repeated, which is great if the behavior is actually moving you forward. But if the behavior is just not losing, then you've built a very comfortable psychological feedback loop around standing still. You feel like you're winning because you feel disciplined. But the scoreboard doesn't care how disciplined you feel. The scoreboard only cares where the money went. This is the good with money trap at its core. The behavior generates enough positive emotion to feel like progress. It generates enough stability to feel safe. But the belt is still moving backward. Let me give you an example with real numbers, because abstract concepts are easy to dismiss and concrete math is harder to argue with. 2 people, call them Marcus and Daniel, same age, 24. Same income, $55,000 per year. Same starting point financially, essentially nothing. Marcus is good with money. He saves 12% of his income, which is $6,600 per year. He puts it all in a high-yield savings account. He feels good about this. After 5 years, he has about $33,000 plus a little interest. Maybe $35,000. He's proud of himself. He should be. That's more than most people his age. Daniel is also saving 12%, same amount, but Daniel puts it in a broad market index fund. He doesn't think about it, doesn't check it obsessively, just contributes and forgets. After 5 years, assuming a historically average market return, somewhere around 7 to 8% annually adjusted for inflation, Daniel has roughly $40,000 to $42,000. That's meaningfully more than Marcus, but not life-changing yet. The gap is real, but the numbers are close enough that Marcus can tell himself the difference isn't worth the risk. Now extend it to 15 years. This is where the math becomes uncomfortable. Marcus, still faithfully putting money in a savings account, yielding maybe 2% on a good year, which barely keeps pace with inflation, has somewhere around $100,000. He feels like he's doing well. He has 6 figures saved. That's an accomplishment. Daniel has somewhere around $220,000 to $250,000 in the same time period, contributing the same amount of money per year. The only variable that changed was where the money was directed. And this doesn't even account for the fact that many people at level 2 eventually start increasing their contributions as their income grows, or that they start understanding leverage and asset acquisition. The gap widens, it doesn't close, and Marcus, still jogging on the belt feeling responsible, is falling further behind a person who appears to be doing almost the same thing. This is not a story about being smart versus being dumb. Marcus is not stupid. He's doing what feels correct. The system just never told him clearly that not losing and building are completely different games. And the system, by the way, has absolutely no incentive to tell him. The bank earning interest on his savings account is delighted with Marcus. That's a good place to pause because I want to make sure I actually talk to you for a second. If you're watching this and this is clicking, you're probably at level 1 or somewhere between 1 and 2 and you're trying to figure out what the actual move is. I'm going to get to that, but I also want to talk about the structural stuff, why the system is designed the way it is, because understanding that changes how you act inside it. If this kind of breakdown is useful to you, subscribe. Not because subscriptions validate me emotionally or whatever, but because this channel is basically where I think out loud about systems and money. And if you want to stay in the loop when I put out new stuff, that's the button. Okay, back to the conveyor belt. Let's talk about why the system is built against the careful person specifically. Not the reckless person, the careful, disciplined, responsible person. Because that's counterintuitive enough to be worth examining. The careful person delays gratification, they save, they build a cash buffer, they feel financially stable, and financial stability weirdly makes you a better customer for the financial industry, not a better investor. Here's what I mean. When you have money sitting safely in an account, you are a low-risk depositor. You are exactly what a bank wants. You are also, from a wealth-building standpoint, extremely easy to exploit because your risk aversion, which got you to the savings in the first place, makes you reluctant to deploy that money into anything that feels uncertain. So it sits, and it earns the interest rate the bank feels like giving you, which is always lower than the bank's own return on that same money. The bank takes your deposit, lends it out at 8, 10, 12% depending on the loan type, pays you 2%, and pockets the spread. You feel safe, they feel profitable. The conveyor belt moves. The irresponsible person who's building something is actually, from the bank's perspective, a higher risk customer. But they're using the system rather than being used by it. They're borrowing at 5 or 6% to invest in something returning 10 or 12. The spread works in their favor. They're running the bank's playbook, just from the other chair. Now, I want to be careful here because this is where people hear leverage good, saving bad, and go do something catastrophically stupid. That's not the point. Leverage without understanding the asset is just faster failure. But the underlying concept that the system has 2 chairs and most people sit in the wrong one, that part is real. Let me tell you about a scenario I've observed. Not from my personal life, just a pattern I've seen play out in multiple forms. Guy in his late 20s, makes decent money, around $70,000 per year. He's been responsible since his first real job. He budgets, he doesn't overspend, he has roughly $45,000 saved after 4 years of careful living. He's proud of it. People around him ask for financial advice and he gives it. He feels like the financially literate person in his friend group, which he is relative to the group. And then one of his friends who has been buying small multifamily properties for 3 years, who the responsible guy always privately thought was being reckless, shows him his net worth statement. It's $280,000 on a $62,000 salary. How? The friend bought a duplex 3 years ago for $180,000. Put down 20%, $36,000. That property is now worth $220,000. He has roughly $80,000 in equity on that first property alone. He also bought a second small rental property the year after, financed similarly, which is generating cash flow and building equity. Meanwhile, our careful guy has $45,000 in a savings account that's worth slightly less in real terms than when he started, because inflation. $280,000 versus $45,000. Same time period, similar income, completely different understanding of what money can do when it's deployed rather than stored. The careful guy was not bad with money. He was good with money the wrong way. He was optimizing for the feeling of security rather than the architecture of growth. He was running in place and calling it winning because he wasn't running backward. I want to talk about something a little more psychological here, because I think the behavioral piece is as important as the financial mechanics. There's a concept I think about a lot, which is the difference between static thinking and dynamic thinking about money. Static thinking is treating your financial life as a fixed balance that needs to be protected. More going out than coming in is bad. More coming in than going out is good. Keep the gap as big as possible, don't take risks. Accumulate. Dynamic thinking is treating your financial life as a system of flows. Money is a resource that decays when it sits still because inflation is constant and opportunity cost is constant. Money that isn't being deployed is losing its potential productivity every single day. The goal isn't to protect the pile. The goal is to route the flows correctly. Static thinkers build emergency funds that become permanent funds. Dynamic thinkers build emergency funds and then immediately start thinking about what to do with everything above that threshold. Static thinkers celebrate net worth increases from saving. Dynamic thinkers care more about cash flow and asset appreciation. One is adding rocks to a pile. One is building infrastructure. And here's the uncomfortable part. Static thinking feels more responsible. It feels more adult. It feels like the thing your parents would approve of, which is, partly why it's so common. The behaviors that generate good approval from your social environment are not always the behaviors that generate good financial outcomes. The system and the social expectation are misaligned. And most people follow the social expectation because the approval is immediate and the financial outcome is 20 years away. Now I want to get into something that I think is genuinely underappreciated, and it connects back to the conveyor belt metaphor in a way that might reframe how you see your entire earning and spending life. The belt moves at different speeds depending on where you live, who you're around, and what social scripts you're operating under. Here's what I mean. If you are in a peer group where homeownership by 30 is expected, where a certain car is baseline, where certain vacations are assumed, you are experiencing enormous invisible pressure to step up your spending as your income increases. This is sometimes called lifestyle inflation, but I think that framing undersells how structural it is. It's not just a matter of personal discipline. It's the social environment physically accelerating the conveyor belt under your feet. Every time income goes up and spending goes up proportionally to maintain social positioning, you've lost the entire leverage opportunity that income increase represented. The person who gets a $10,000 raise and banks $7,000 of it is moving differently than the person who gets the same raise and upgrades their apartment. And neither of those people is making a bad decision in isolation. One of them is just playing a different time horizon. I read somewhere once that most people overestimate what they'll want in 5 years and underestimate how much their current choices constrain their future choices. I think about that constantly. The apartment upgrade feels like a good quality of life decision right now. In 5 years, it's the reason you couldn't deploy capital into an asset that would have changed your trajectory. Every spending decision is also a deployment decision in disguise. Every dollar you spend is a dollar you didn't put to work somewhere. That's not a guilt trip, it's just arithmetic. The goal is not to spend nothing, the goal is to be honest about the trade-off you're making every single time. Let me tell you something that I think sounds obvious but actually breaks people's brains when they sit with it long enough. You think the problem is how much you earn, but actually the problem is the ratio between what you earn, what you spend, and what you deploy. And then what that deployed capital does over time. Most conversations about getting wealthy focus almost entirely on the first number, income. Earn more, get promoted, start a side hustle. All of which, sure, helps, but if the ratio between earning, spending, and deploying stays broken, more income just means more money evaporating faster. I've seen people go from making $40,000 to making $90,000 and be in roughly the same financial position 3 years later, because the increase in income triggered an equal or greater increase in spending. The belt just moved faster. Income is the input. What actually matters is the architecture that income flows through. Fix the architecture first, and the income increase becomes transformative. Leave the architecture broken, and the income increase is noise. There is a small but important comedic truth here, which is that the most financially dangerous moment in many people's lives is not when they're broke. It's when they first start making decent money. Because that's when the spending decisions get made that lock in the structure for the next decade. The apartment gets upgraded. The car gets upgraded. The restaurant budget expands. And all of it feels earned and fine and responsible even. You're not going into debt, you're just spending what you make, but the opportunity cost is enormous and invisible, and you won't feel it for years. This is, I think, one of the most underrated traps in the whole conversation. Not overspending, not debt, just spending proportionally to income instead of spending proportionally to a predetermined allocation target and investing the rest. Let me walk through a very simple illustration of why this matters so much more than most people intuit. Person A makes $60,000 per year. They save and invest 10%, $6,000 per year. They do this for 30 years. At 7% average annual return, they end up with approximately $560,000. Not bad. Comfortable retirement. Person B makes the same $60,000 per year. They find a way, through a combination of spending control and a side income, to invest 20%. $12,000 per year. Same 30 years. Same return rate. They end up with approximately $1,100,000. The difference in annual investment is $6,000. $500 a month. The difference in outcome is $540,000. The conveyor belt and the compounding math do not care about your intentions or your work ethic. They care about the numbers and the time. That's it. Now here's where I want to get into something more structural and a little darker, because I think most financial content stops at personal behavior and doesn't talk about what's actually happening at the system level. The financial system in its current form is not neutral. It is not a level playing field that simply rewards good decisions. It has baked into it a series of mechanisms that consistently transfer wealth from people who are cash flow dependent to people who are asset rich, from people who sell their time to people who own things that make money while they sleep. This is not a conspiracy, it's not a secret, it's just the logical outcome of how the system is structured, and it's been working this way for a very long time. When you own assets, stocks, real estate, a business, and those assets go up in value, you don't pay taxes on the gains until you sell, which means you can let compounding run uninterrupted. You can borrow against the asset, which is not a taxable event, to fund your lifestyle or additional purchases. And if you hold assets until death, in many cases the cost basis resets and the gains are never taxed at all. When you earn income from working, from selling your time, you pay taxes immediately at ordinary income rates before you can do anything else with that money. The asset owner gets to play with the full dollar. The wage earner plays with 60 or 70 cents of every dollar depending on their bracket and location. This is not a political commentary, it's a mechanical observation. The system taxes cash flow from labor more aggressively than gains from capital. So if your financial strategy is centered entirely on earning more labor income and carefully saving it, you are operating in the part of the system that faces the highest friction. You are climbing the hardest part of the mountain. The people moving efficiently through the system are doing more of their financial activity on the asset side, not because they're smarter, because they understood which part of the system has lower friction. And here's the counterintuitive piece that connects this back to the good with money trap. Being careful with your labor income, budgeting it, saving it, protecting it, is a level 1 strategy operating in a high friction part of the system. It feels responsible. It is responsible to a point. But it's also playing the hardest version of the game because it stays almost entirely on the labor side of the ledger. The transition from level 1 to level 2, from defensive to active, from labor income to capital participation, is the real shift. And it doesn't require being rich to start. It just requires understanding that the conveyor belt has an off-ramp, and most people never look for it because they're focused on jogging better. Now let me talk about something I see constantly in the I'm building wealth community online that I think is genuinely misguided in a way that's worth naming. There is a version of personal finance content that is basically just performance discipline. It's tracking every dollar, optimizing every expense, finding the most efficient way to not spend money. And it generates content beautifully because it gives people a tangible thing to do, a spreadsheet to fill out, a category to cut, a subscription to cancel, and that tangible action generates the reward feeling we talked about earlier. But here's the thing about expense optimization as a primary strategy. It has a floor. You can only cut so much. You can cancel every subscription, meal prep every meal, never go out, drive a 10-year-old car, and at some point you've reached maximum optimization and you're still constrained by your income. The ceiling on expense cutting is the floor. It's a finite game. Income growth and capital deployment are, at least theoretically, uncapped. You can always earn more, you can always compound more. The upside is not bounded in the same way that expense reduction is bounded. This doesn't mean stop tracking spending. Awareness of where money goes is genuinely useful. But if the dominant activity is optimization of spending and the secondary activity is saving into a cash account, you've built a very efficient machine that goes nowhere. You've got a perfectly tuned engine running in neutral. I want to get into the part that I think is the most practically useful, what actually needs to change mechanically for someone in the good with money trap to actually start moving. Because I don't want this to just be 30 minutes of the system is designed against you. Isn't that interesting? Subscribe? That would be useless. Let me be concrete. There are 3 shifts, not habits, not rules, shifts in how you think about the whole thing that change the underlying behavior naturally rather than requiring daily willpower. The first shift is from protecting money to directing it. The mental model changes from how do I keep this safe to where does this work best. An emergency fund is still necessary, 3 to 6 months of expenses in cash, liquid, done. But anything above that threshold should have a job. It should be working somewhere. The question you ask is not, is this safe? But what is this doing for me while it sits here? Cash above your emergency fund is losing productivity every day. Give it a job. And the job doesn't have to be exotic. For most people starting out, a broad market index fund is the right answer. Low cost, diversified, historically reliable over long time frames. You don't need to be picking stocks or doing anything clever. You just need to stop leaving capital in a state of perpetual low productivity storage. The conveyor belt slows significantly when your capital is working even modestly. The second shift is from income focus to spread focus. The spread is the gap between what you earn and what you spend. Income matters, but the spread matters more at the beginning. Two people earning $60,000 with a $30,000 spread are in the same position as one person earning $90,000 with a $30,000 spread. The spread determines how fast you can deploy capital. Focus on maximizing the spread, not just the top line. This also means that a raise or side income changes character entirely depending on whether it changes the spread or just changes the lifestyle. A $5,000 annual raise that goes entirely into lifestyle inflation changes the spread by 0. A $5,000 raise that goes entirely into investment contributions changes the spread by 5,000. Same raise, completely different trajectory, same job, different architecture. The third shift is from feeling responsible to thinking structurally. This is the hardest one because it requires replacing a feeling with a framework. The feeling of being responsible around money, the virtue feeling, the discipline feeling, is not a reliable indicator of whether you're actually building anything. You can feel completely responsible and be perfectly stationary. The feeling is not the metric. The structural question is, in 5 years, what does my financial life look like as a direct result of this year's decisions? Not as a hope, not as a plan, as a probable outcome based on the actual numbers. If the answer is roughly the same but with a bigger savings account, something needs to change. If the answer is significantly different because of how I'm deploying capital, you're moving. The belt doesn't care how responsible you feel. It cares where the money went and what it did while it was there. Let me bring this back to the cold open because I promised to. The person with the color-coded budget and $42,000 at 31. And the coworker who bought a rental property. Here's the thing. The coworker isn't reckless. He looks reckless from the outside because he's spending on things the careful person considers wasteful. But he also made one structural decision, one deployment decision, that moved him to a different part of the system. He put capital into an asset. He used the bank's money to do it. The asset appreciates. The tenant helps pay the mortgage. His net worth builds whether he's tracking his lunch spending or not. The careful person built a perfect fortress, perfectly defended, nothing getting out wastefully. Also, nothing particularly getting in. You can be disciplined and still lose this game if the discipline is applied to the wrong layer. That's the core insight. The game is not about how tightly you grip the money. It's about where you let it flow. Stop jogging on the belt. Find the off-ramp. It's not glamorous, it's not fast, and it definitely doesn't look like the stuff being sold to you as financial freedom online. It's boring and structural and mechanical, which is honestly exactly how it should feel. If a financial strategy feels exciting and novel, that's a red flag, not a green one. Here's the practical version of everything I just said. 1. Decide on a deployment number before the month starts, not after. Not I'll invest what's left over. Leftover investing is how you end up investing nothing because there's always a reason money had somewhere else to be. Decide the number, move it on payday, live on what remains. The order of operations matters more than the amount. 2. Make sure every dollar above your emergency fund has a defined destination. Cash sitting in a savings account above your emergency threshold should feel uncomfortable because it is actually losing value in real terms. Index fund, retirement account, down payment fund with a specific target and timeline. Anything with a job is better than productive capital and storage. 3. Raise your ceiling by finding leverage. This doesn't mean reckless borrowing. It means understanding that time in the market, compound returns, and eventually, when you understand it, asset ownership with financing, are the mechanisms that actually build wealth at a pace that matters. One decision made correctly at level 2 or 3 does more for your net worth than a decade of perfect level 1 behavior. That's not inspiring, it's just the math. The conveyor belt is real, it's moving. You are on it right now whether you acknowledge it or not. The question is not whether it's fair that it exists. It's what you're going to do with your feet. If you found this useful and you want to think more clearly about how money actually works, not how we're told it works, but mechanically, structurally, at the system level, subscribe. That's what this channel is.